This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Many of my listeners and many of my students know about my funny fascination with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I talk about them a lot in my classes on strategic communication because they offer endless examples on what not to do and occasionally on what to do. But I am also fascinated by family dynamics and relationship dynamics, which they so boldly present to the public. So if you're fascinated with human lives and human stories and relationships and lessons we can learn from them, this family really provides plenty of that. So one day I read a piece in Hello magazine that commented on yet another one of Harry's not so brilliantly conducted interviews and came across an opinion by Julie Cobalt, a former attorney who turned conflict resolution expert. I quote, "Publicly criticizing your family, especially in a memoir, virtually guarantees defensiveness and further distance. It also strips you of control over how your message is received." So many lessons on communicating in these two sentences, from what to say out loud, even if it's not to media, and how to keep control of your message. But so this hit very close to home as an author of two memoirs that's hoping to one day start teaching memoir writing. I'd love that. So I immediately sent Julie an invitation to be on the show, and she has accepted. And we ended up having one of the most interesting and inspiring conversations yet. I am so grateful to Harry and Meghan for not only providing me endless material for my university lectures, but also now fascinating guests. I do hope you'll get as much out of this conversation as I did. Hi and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider. My guest today is Julie Cobalt. Julie is an attorney with over 25 years of experience as a conflict resolution expert. She specialized in conflict coaching, mediation, and conflict resolution training. And in these 25 years, Julie has accomplished 1,200 successful mediations and 200 trainings. Julie, hi and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I am so excited, especially since I learned that you have 4 daughters.
You do.
And you are one of 4 sisters.
I am. Yes.
We have a lot to talk about. Tell me about how you came into conflict management and conflict coaching.
I think a couple of things. I don't think it was something I ever planned to do. I don't think it's something people plan to do. I do think in retrospect now, at almost 59, I think I was a very sensitive child. And I think I noticed where I grew up, which is in northern Minnesota, in a small town, that the way people deal with conflict in that part of the world is in a way that's very passive aggressive. So people never yell or shout or actually have conflict on the surface, but they express their displeasure or their unhappiness by being silent or kind of giving the cold treatment or the silent treatment, I guess. And as a result, I think I grew up always very confused about, is this okay? Is it not okay? Are people happy? Are they not happy? And so I think that was kind of the genesis of how it started. And I think as I went through life, I was like many people who don't necessarily have direction, looking for a specific path. And so I ended up going to law school, in part because it felt like a path, a specific career, and in part because I felt like it really does help people resolve conflict. I mean, that's what I thought it was about.
And it wasn't?
I think that it is and it isn't. I think what I learned is that there is, again, this is just a personal opinion, there's often no kind of real right or wrong, that there's valid points on both sides and there's valid perspectives on both sides. And so to be put in a position of having to advocate for one quote unquote side when I had so much empathy for the other side made it very difficult, because I just had this sense of like, well, I get where they're coming from and I get where they're coming from. And, however this plays out, everyone's going to be unhappy in the end. And even people who ended up winning, or when we would litigate the case and they would be the prevailing party, they left feeling very angry. They were angry that it cost so much. They were angry that it took that much time. They were angry that they had to go through the process, all of that. There was never any real satisfaction or happiness. So to that extent, no, it didn't feel like it resolved anything.
Mm-hmm. Is it different with coaching and what you do mediation and what you do now?
Yeah, I think it's radically different, because what you can do, what I learned through mediation particularly, and I kind of fell into it. I got a internship with the city attorney's office in an area where they did victim and offender types of mediations. So people who had committed a misdemeanor, not a felony, but some type of crime, and there was a victim as a part of that I would sit down and mediate a resolution between the two of them. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'll give you the whatever purse back that I stole. It was really talking about what happened, the impact it had on them, the resulting consequence. And both people had an opportunity to hear and listen. And it honestly felt like a miracle, just like a mini miracle each time.
Wow. So it really led you into this. You were led into this process and into where you are, the position where you are now.
I think so. I mean, it's one of those things like you don't really see it until you look backwards, and then you're like, oh, that plus that plus that plus that, and then it just happened.
Yeah. And so now you are working with many big companies I see on your website, but also with families. Can you tell me a little bit about that, about working in so many different circumstances and cases?
So I would say most of my work right now is not with companies. That was really more in the past. I worked as an independent contractor for a conflict resolution provider in San Diego, and I did a lot of facilitations, which means many people. It could be 100 people, or it could be multi-party situations that are people in conflict or groups in conflict. Or I did trainings for a lot of these corporations and providers. But now I would say 100% of my work is around either families, specifically families that are in conflict, particularly with adult children, or adult children who are struggling with their relationship with their parent, or vice versa, or couples who are still together but are in conflict and struggle to figure out how to navigate it, or men or women who are separating or divorcing. And even though they don't have an overt conflict, they may still have children. And so they have to, it's not so much like, oh, let's figure out a custody agreement. They have that in place, but they still are triggered by one another because of something that they said or texted or whatever. And so helping them work through the conflict, even though it's maybe post-marriage and, post-divorce. So really anybody who has a conflict in any kind of setting, the more relational it is, the more I find it enjoyable.
And we just spoke about you living between Dubai and San Diego.
Right.
When you are in Dubai, are you working with expats mostly? I'm now interested in cultural differences in conflict. That because this podcast is so international and open to all the different cultures. We're learning about different cultures, and especially the emotional sides and dealing with families. And do you work with people locally, or is it mostly expats? And
it's predominantly expats. I would say, first of all, Dubai is basically 90% expats. And so it's really only about 10% Emiratis. And how Emiratis resolve their conflict is much more internal, whereas expats, and it's not necessarily Western expats, there's a lot of Southeast Asian expats who have reached out to me and have worked with me. And so, but it's predominantly expats.
It's interesting because you're talking about passive aggressive. I am originally Croatian, and we are everything but passive aggressive. We are exactly the contrary. We are we are Balkans, Slavs mixed with Mediterranean. So it's just emotion and it's outward and it's expression, and it's these big explosions, and then 2 minutes later everything's resolved and everybody loves each other.
It's so interesting you say that.
British. Yeah, my husband's half British. And so through him, but also through his American friends, like through his friends, the first time I even heard of something called passive aggressiveness was through his friends. And I had to learn this. And it's fascinating to me how different, how extremely different we can be in this way, which directly influences our conflicts and the way we deal with them.
Absolutely. And I have a lot of Bulgarian friends here too. We've had the same conversation. This is what it is. I'm just going to say it. I would say in the United States, particularly in northern United States, which was settled by Scandinavians and Northern Europeans, their style is much more kind of poker face. But through subtle expressions or nuances, they are communicating something very deeply, angry that they're feeling, but they don't ever say it. And so you have to learn to read between, it's a second language, so to speak.
It is. It is. And you really have to learn it. And now that we're spending more time in the UK and communicating with our friends in UK, I have to ask my husband sometimes to translate like he did in the States. I'm like, I don't understand this text message. Would she like me to come over for a cup of tea? Or does it mean like you're invited, but please don't come over for a cup of tea?
Yes, exactly. It means maybe that, maybe the other, and you will learn by your mistakes.
Yes. Julie, let's talk about Mom Joanne.
Okay.
Will you tell me about her life and her story?
Yeah, so my mom was one of 8 children. There were 7 daughters. She was the second to last. And she grew up on a farm by very uneducated parents in Minnesota. And my dad was a very successful, quote unquote, like city kid who was, the star of the football team and the basketball team. And my dad got a full ride to Harvard. So he was like this really, bright guy. And my mom, basically they started to date and she got pregnant. And so at that time, that's what you did is you got married. And so she came from a background where there wasn't a lot of education and there wasn't a lot of emphasis on it. And I think just kind of jumping ahead a little bit, just what she's like is I think that it was very difficult to be with somebody who was as successful as my dad was, who became a physician and then a general surgeon and then a reconstructive surgeon. Mm-hmm. And I think there was always a sense of inadequacy between my mom, at least how she felt toward my dad. Mm-hmm. And I think that had a really big kind of impact on her in terms of how she viewed herself.
Did it lead to depression or aggression? Or because often if we swallow these feelings of inadequacy for a long time, it can lead to physical problems or depression or...
I think that, so they had 4 daughters in 2 really quickly. Before he graduated from college, he had my 2 older sisters. Then when he finished his first residency, they had me and my other sister. And I think the way my mom dealt with it is, you just have a job to do. You've got these kids, and my dad was working and he was still playing football and basketball and running track and.
Oh, wow.
So there was just a lot to be done. And so I think it wasn't so much, it never manifested as any physical issues. I think my mom basically evolved in a way that she received her good feelings and her validation by doing acts for others. So she is the type of person who, as long as I know, has always done things for other people. And that means that we were raised in a pretty religious way, not so much like the Bible is the truth, but rather, what did Jesus do? That's what we should do. If they're hungry, you give them food. If they're sick, you give them medicine. If they need shelter, you give them a home. So in our home, I've never lived in my home with just my sisters and my parents. It was always anywhere from 1 to 15 other people. It could have been a hitchhiker. It could have been someone paroled from prison who was a convicted murderer. It could have been a dozen people from Vietnam after the war or a domestic shelter. So there was always this emphasis on how can we be helpful and do good for other people. So I think that's where she got a lot of her validation, because objectively, if you look at that, it's amazing. I mean, it's incredible. And I think that's where she really felt her most kind of seen.
Is she still alive?
Yes, she is. Yeah.
And what is she doing now? How is she doing?
So my parents stayed together until my dad ended up having an affair with somebody. And then my parents divorced when I was in my 20s, which is about, I guess, 30 years ago. And my dad went on to marry the other woman, and they had a child. And when they divorced, my sisters and I all were having kids or going to have kids. And so my mom, from that point on, has continued to do a lot, but she's basically moved from each of our sisters and just stayed with each of us. But the last 20 years or so, she has lived in our home in San Diego.
Is she doing well? She's in a good shape?
Yes, she's super fit. She's super healthy. She's like 85, and she drives from Minnesota to San Diego back and forth once a year. She did it recently within, I think, 3 or 4 days, like a 30-hour drive. So
wow.
Yes, it's super impressive.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What would you say were the most important things you learned from her?
I think the most important thing I learned, and I think this has really contributed to my profession, is that in bringing so many people into our home, I think she really taught us the sense or this belief that all people are good. You know, that people often have circumstances that force them into situations, but that doesn't by definition make them bad. And I think that ability not to judge someone has been really critical when it comes to mediating and conflict coaching, because I'm able to see different perspectives. And I think that was a very powerful lesson.
It is very interesting now that I taught the class on persuasion. One of the psychological theories, I forgot what it's called, is that we blame the person. When something goes wrong, we blame the person for their character, or that they intentionally did something. Oh, they're lazy, or they're always late, or something. We never think about circumstances.
Right.
Yeah, we never think something might have happened. Maybe they were stuck on the highway. Maybe something really happened and it wasn't their characteristic or the way personality. It's the circumstances. So it's very, very important to that aspect of generally people are good. They just have different circumstances.
Yeah, and I think if one takes a moment and really tries, as you're talking about, kind of looks at the ability to understand before they react, that even that slight pause to consider what might have been going on can be really, powerful, can be really life-changing insofar as how do I want to respond to this situation. But unfortunately, most people come from a place of reacting rather than responding. And as a result, there's no pause in there to consider, oh, well, maybe this was happening or maybe that was happening. And there are so many scenarios that once you find out, it's kind of like, oh, I wish I had thought of that and I wouldn't have said or done that.
Yeah. And this is where communication matters so much. And it's very similar. It's interesting. I was thinking about conflict resolution and talking to you. And what I teach my students always, whenever I teach any communication class, the most important, number one thing, I'm like, if you learned one thing in my class, I want you to understand your audience. And I think this is very, very similar to what you are doing in conflict management or resolution, is understanding where the other person is coming from, seeing their perspective.
Yeah, and that's not easy to do because we're so tightly attached to our own narrative.
Exactly.
And the idea that there might be a conflicting narrative or some even third possibility is hard to get people to detach from that, because really what happens is it takes them away from that safe space or that comfort zone of validation. Because if you feel that you've been wronged, who wants to move away from that? You get people, patting you on the back and saying, "Oh, they shouldn't have done that, and you didn't do anything wrong." And so it's nice and feels very safe to be in that space.
Yeah. But let's go back to Mama Julie.
Yeah.
Joanne, sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have other lessons?
I think the other lesson was when my parents divorced, it was very ugly and messy and painful. And I think many years later, my mom was able to get to a point where she reached out to my dad and she said, "Let's all of us go on vacation. You, your wife, your kid, our kid, everybody, our spouses at the time, our children, the grandchildren, because life goes on. This is not the end. This was a period of time, but we can, make the future look different." And I think that had a huge impact on me as well, because I have a very non-traditional situation with my husband. And so I think that helped us navigate something that most people wouldn't be able to navigate or would struggle to.
Mm-hmm. So getting over things and looking forward and not holding grudges, is that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think those are two big lessons that she gave to us.
Do you have any others?
I think, the truth of the matter is I have a difficult relationship with my mom. So this took a lot for me to come up with these.
Oh, you have a complicated relationship with her.
Yeah, so I had to really meditate on what were the lessons, because my first reaction is do everything the opposite of my mom, which I thought, well, that's probably not the most helpful.
But it's also a lesson that we can look at our parents and decide to do things in a different way.
Yeah, but I think that's more of a latter question, which is what is something you wish she would have done?
Yes, tell me about that.
I think that getting back to the point I was making, which is kind of a blessing and the curse of when she brought, it was predominantly my mom, so many people into our home, which is a really invaluable lesson, as I mentioned. I think her validation and her affirmation came from being a kind, loving, generous person to everyone outside of our family. So the way that my sisters and I were treated was this kind of belief, like, you're fine. You've got a roof over your head, you've got food on the table. And so you're fine. Look at this poor person who's come from, this horrible background and this horrible this. And so it was really beat into us. These were like statements I remember. You should always think of everyone before yourself. Always think of others before yourself. This idea that you had any value or you needed anything was really considered sinful. And so I think it was very, very difficult and continues to be. I don't think it's one of those, I turned the proverbial corner and like magically everything went away. I think it's taken a lifetime of learning how to take that, see the value in it, see the area where it's not been particularly helpful, and learn to kind of heal that or deal with that. So I think that was both kind of a blessing and a curse.
But Julie, it's so important because, and you've listened so many of my old episodes, thank you. And one of the biggest lessons I keep hearing and learning is that we women obviously biologically have ingrained, and this has been supported through the patriarchy and the whole system where women were taking care of others and were there to serve others. But we so deeply, both from the society and from our biology, have deeply ingrained this feeling or this need to take care of others. And I think we're at the stage of our existence now where we women have to counteract to this and learn how much of this is healthy and beautiful and nourishing both for us and our environment, and where we're coming to self-sacrifice, which serves nobody. It doesn't serve us, and it doesn't serve people whom we are trying to help. So it's interesting that you too have this lesson, that this is something you bring from your home. But where I'm aiming at is it makes me very sad that she would take care of everybody else but her family. This is a very interesting psychological moment that she got the validation from other people and not from being there for you guys.
And it makes sense. If you think about it, you get a public perception of like so generous, so kind, so giving. And that's where you get that self-esteem and that sense of, again, validation. You're not going to get it from like your kids who are like, you never do anything for me. That's how kids are. And so the kids were just expected to be a certain way, but the validation came from all of these kind of acts of charity for others.
That's when we're looking for validation outside of home from the public in some shape and form.
Right.
What I wanted to ask, because you have so much experience in conflict resolution and families, and would there be a lesson or some lessons that you took from your professional experience?
Yeah, I would say there's something very easy and very clear and very straightforward. And this is for all relationships, not just, mothers and their daughters or children. But to me, there's what I call 3 buckets. And each of these 3 buckets needs to be filled. And you have to maintain them, kind of at a full level. And they're in no particular order, but one is self-care. Are you noticing yourself? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you getting enough to sleep? Are you taking time for yourself? So just kind of the bucket I would label self-care. And that's the one that we all kind of ignore, like, oh, I'm fine. I need to get this job done.
Yeah.
But so self-care. The second one is boundaries. So yes, she's my mom. Yes, she's an amazing woman. Yes, I've learned a lot from her, but spending too much time with her is not really healthy for me. So how do I manage those two? And how do I set boundaries that are healthy for me that can maintain the relationship? That's another one that people really struggle with.
Yes.
And then the third one, and it's kind of, there's 2 parts to the third one. I call it shifting perspectives. And so one of the things is if you look at your mom or whoever, and you're like, well, they're whatever, lazy, this, blah, blah, blah. How can you start to see them through a different lens? Because if we keep going back to that same lens, there's never going to be any shift. But the second part of that is we tend to look at ourselves as, again, kind of using a generic word, victim. But the second part is how can we shift the perspective on what we have or have not contributed to this relationship? It's very easy for me to sit here and say, oh, well, she did this and she did this and she did this. And, I've done lots of exercises around this. I did one thing where for 58 days, I wrote down something I either respected, admired, or appreciated about her to kind of force myself to see her from different angles. But then equally, 58 days of what have I contributed to this relationship that has not made it that perhaps great or as healthy as it could be. And that's not to say, dismiss or discount anything, but just again, to look at something from different angles. Conflict, that's ultimately the whole basis of conflict, is one's ability to look at it from different angles.
Did it help?
I think everything helps. And I think that there is no magic cure. I think it is a commitment to those 3 buckets. If you can commit to those 3 buckets and be intentional about all of them, yes, you can definitely take any relationship and soften it. And again, maybe one bucket needs a little bit more than the others, but if you ignore one, I don't think that you'll ever have a decent relationship or a tolerable relationship. I think you will probably continue to struggle.
Julia, I'm just reading a book by a assistant or one of the close collaborators of C.G. Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz, and she wrote this book about female in fairy tales. Incredible book. I'm just like, very difficult to read, but beautiful. And it's interesting. She talks about our female path to individuation and self-development and so on. And I just read last night somewhere that sometimes we just have to let go. And sometimes things just get better and like heal on themselves, which we are so in our current society and culture, we're so used to be doing and healing and, trying and striving. And it was very interesting yesterday reading this sentence where she's like, sometimes you just let it be and it will solve itself by itself. You will heal. It will heal by itself. What do you have an opinion on that?
I do. I think I love that idea of like, let it go. I think in reality, it's very difficult for people to do. I do a workshop on letting go, and I think most people want to let go and let it be. I think their overactive mind makes it very difficult to effectuate that. It's not for a lack of desire, it's for an inability to know how to do it. And so I agree with it in theory, but I think in the practical aspect of it, I think a lot of people need support. They just, it just doesn't happen.
Do you, when you do these kind of workshops, do you do them online? Are people from around the world able to join you, or is it in person?
I do both. And they're specifically related. The ones I'm doing right now are specifically related to, I have a men's group and women's group for the West Coast and for Gulf Standard Time. And they're related to men and or women who are going through separation or divorce, because you can see where this is a really tough thing to do. And I do think part of it is, time. Time is something we have no control over, but it's the one thing we all want to control. And so I think time is kind of that let it be, but we struggle to actually do it.
Julie, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add to our conversation?
No, just thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I wish you all the best in your move.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you. If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.